So these are things that are real, and so I'm going to present now a picture. You'll be noticing the trends and patterns. So let's look at now in 2015. This is the picture, and these are the languages that are offered in the province. And if you look at those languages, you've got Afrikaans, isiNdebele, isiZulu, Sepedi, Setswana, Xitsonga, English. So those are the languages, and these are ordinary public schools. You can easily see the pattern, grade R to 3 on the left-hand side. You can see the biggest color in the middle is Sepedi, because that's the largest language spoken, and then followed obviously by Venda and then Xitsonga and others. Okay, but the English one, the red one, if you look at grades R to 3, is very small. English, very small. This is a language of learning and teaching in the foundation phase. Okay, but you move from grade 3 all of a sudden to grade 4, there was a sudden change. All of them almost. There's a small blue. That small blue is Afrikaans. So these are historically languages of learning and teaching that we had. They now take over from grade 4 all of a sudden. So there's a big jump. So if you had learners, 90% of them never communicated in English, and now all of a sudden in grade 4 they are now communicating in English by a different teacher altogether. And they were 40 in a class, now all of a sudden they're 23 in a class. So you're likely to have, and so even performance, that to indicate from maths and science, they might be performing, very often you have this. If you look at the performance in maths and science, especially if you look at, so it goes down and down up to senior phase. So senior phase becomes the lowest pass percentage. In mathematics, it's even getting worse. Okay, while it was very high, numeracy was very high in the foundation phase. That is 2015. 2016, last year, the picture is not changing. If you look at trends and patterns, remains the same, except that the number of schools now start to change. Because from economics point of view, it's not sustainable to have small schools. So you start to see the merging of schools and the closing of schools. And it's just a natural phenomenon, because if parents feel that this school is not doing well for me, I would rather pass 4 schools to go to the 5th one and take my children there. Okay? So they all flock to schools that seem to be performing. And these are schools that traditionally had good language foundation in English, especially English medium schools, and then they'll go to those historically English medium and flock to those schools. And as a result, then schools starts policies there to merge schools and also to close schools. So it's happening in the province. More than hundreds of schools have reduced. I think we've reduced from 4,000 something to about 3,000 now, 900 or so. Okay, schools. So, but at the same time, communities are saying we want to build more schools. So political this side, but at the same time, economics says, look, we can't sustain. And as a result, it impacts on, if we look at language in science, technology, engineering, math, what are these contextual factors doing? How do they impact on teaching and learning? Okay? And so political decisions are taken, and they are driven by many factors, including economics, which is a driver. And because to sustain the posts and the paying, the salaries, and LTSM, remember in the province, all learners, it's 100%, I mean, school fees paid for, almost across. And therefore, LTSM, all. So you'll have to manage across 4,000 schools and make sure that LTSM is supplied on annual basis to every learner. And managing that alone is a huge undertaking. Then the retrieval, because a textbook, if it is a mathematics textbook, it's given to a school, the lifespan is 5 years. But it must be used not by one person. In other words, retrieve it, give it to somebody, next year retrieve it, give it to somebody. And so it's a huge management undertaking to do that. So that is a picture. If we look at language, I was just choosing language of learning and teaching, who's taking it. I didn't interrogate what it means in the teaching of it and who teaches it and what informs what. If I had time, I could also share with you. We have done some study last month. We had teachers, but this was not for the general education and training phase. We had teachers for physical sciences, mathematics, and business studies for 3 weeks. And we said that before they come for 3 weeks, 192 of them, they must write a pre-test. Then they go for 3 weeks, and then they must write a post-test after 3 weeks. Across the 3 subjects, on average, they got about 30%. And then after that, then they moved to about 50%. So that is revealing a lot. So currently we are doing a topics analysis to look at what are the areas that at least the 30% they got in, we don't have to intervene there. The rest of the 70%, we need to analyze that. And then after analysis, then we can have interventions that must run across. And so maybe we'll be able to see even the influence of language. By language, I mean language, if you're in mathematics, language of mathematics. If you're in science, language of science, which is complicated now by principles of our national curriculum statement or curriculum and assessment policy statements. One of the principles, for example, is valuing indigenous knowledge systems. Okay? How does that interact with the way you teach science? And what we find is that generally, but it's not yet quantified in a statistical sense, we need to work on it, is that if a teacher is teaching physical sciences and has majored in physics, is likely to spend more time on the physics part than on the chemistry part. And if this person has majored in chemistry and has not done physics, is likely to spend more time teaching the chemistry part. If he's teaching, we've got strands now in the physical sciences, 4 strands in the general education and training phase. Now you are bringing not just physics and chemistry, you are bringing zoology, botany, so it's even more complicated. If somebody has studied zoology but has not done physics, chemistry, so you are likely to spend more time dealing with 20%. So curriculum coverage becomes an issue. And if you bring now the indigenous knowledge systems, and people have not been trained on it, they don't know how to deal with it. They live it, but they don't know how to package it in terms of the curriculum. So that is another complicating factor. That was public schools, what you call public ordinary schools. If we look at the private schools, we found that none were offering in the foundation phase language of learning and teaching, in indigenous language. When indigenous, it means non-English and non-Africans. They were not offering. So the picture is totally different for private schools. So there they just start, the rate starts from grade R1 immediately. If we go to special needs schools, this is 2015 to 2016. This is also in the, I'm not sure whether it's only foundation phase. I think it's foundation phase. If you look at the foundation phase, SPED is the highest because demographically, it's the most spoken language there, and it doesn't change from 2015 to 2016. If you look at English, also it doesn't change, it's the second most, and then followed by Chitsonga, Chivenda, and so on. But what is interesting is that from 2015 to 2016, 2 are increasing. The rest, either they diminish or they remain the same. But you do have two then that seem to be increasing from 2015 to 2016. One is Sesotho. So it's increasing. So we'll have to investigate. I'm not sure if we're having more schools now offering Sesotho, because maybe there are more people in the province coming or so on. So we'll have to look at that. But there's also other than 11 official languages. That is increasing also. Okay? So that is in the case of the special needs schools. Now, interesting phenomenon when you look at the types and the numbers of schools, as I mentioned, because of the contextual factors. So you notice that the number of public schools are diminishing in number because of the reasons that I just mentioned. But when you look at private schools, they're increasing in number. So as we diminish in the public than in the private, meaning you've got more people going to private schools, and therefore the number of schools are increasing, the private schools. While the special needs schools, it's only those two areas, but the rest, I think, they're more or less remaining the same. Let me just see. Okay, I'm left with 2 minutes. Okay, right, I think what is emerging, and this is something you could chew, we do recognize 11 plus. I'm saying 11 plus because other languages like sign language, I'm not sure about the Khoisan, what is it? Those Mandarin and so on. So, but let's just, for the time being, stick with the 11. We now have this, and it is underpinned by additive multilingualism. So you will notice, for example, as you go up, then you'll have first additional language. This additional is based on that theory of additive multilingualism. Then second additional language is based on that theory. Okay, so this is applied in public and special schools, especially based on, and the idea is to build on your home language. And home language is not mother tongue. It's home language. It means language spoken at home, basically. And I might be a vendor, and I might be married to a Chinese, and our children might speak English. And so you choose a home language in that case. So it's not the language of the mother. All right. So that brings another spin, okay? But if you look at that picture that I indicated, is the tenacity of the historical legacy, you know, because we have, and the way democracy works is that certain structures have been given powers to decide. So at a school level, the language issue, the deciding, the governance structure is the SGB on the language policy. And obviously the SGB is also looking at economics and other factors, currency, status. There are lots of things that come into play. So even we who are involved in pedagogy and teaching and learning, we know the sound principles, but the reality out there might be different because people don't understand your big theories. They want to look at what works now. So it means we'll have to do a lot of work in terms of advocacy, we ourselves, so that we can assist them to make sound decisions, informed decisions. So when you go to science, technology, engineering, mathematics, it's even more pronounced there. Very, very much more pronounced in the language legacy. So as a result, especially because if you look at the private schools, we've done a study, no African languages were given. And so there is a program now adopted by government, which is called Incremental Introduction of African Languages into the schooling system. And the approach that was adopted is incremental. In other words, you can't have just imposing. you'll have to work with communities and introduce, because it has implications. When you introduce it, do you have posts? Do you have this? Have you trained the teachers? Do you have materials? All those kinds of things. So it's an incremental introduction, but it is an official program of the department, and we piloted it in the last 2 or 3 years, and now we're trying to implement it gradually. And it's going to be a long journey, because it must take into consideration the principles that underpin the National Curriculum Statement. And so therefore the sectors such as represented by the National Science and Technology Forum have got an important role to play. With these words, I thank you.